1.
Thanks. This is Senate Government Operations. It is Tuesday, May 11th, and we're just a tiny bit late getting started because we were talking about baby cradles. Sorry about that. So I'm going to give a couple introductory remarks here before we get started. I will say, just for everybody who's watching and who is with us, we don't use Zoom in this because we consider Zoom as a side conversation.
We don't use
You
chat.
mean chat?
Chat.
Oh,
You mean
yeah,
chat.
that's what I meant.
Zoom because we're all on Zoom.
We're all on Zoom. We don't use Zoom. We don't use chat. Sorry about that, because we consider chat a side conversation. If we were in the committee room, we would ask people to go out in the hall and have their conversations. So the only way we use chat is if somebody refers to a document or something, then Gail will post it there so that everybody can see it. But other than that, we don't use chat. So some of you are new to our committee, so we're going to introduce ourselves and then we'll get going here. I'm Jeanette White from Windham County.
I'm Anthony Polina from Washington County.
Brian Collmore, Rutland County.
Allison Clarkson, Windsor County District.
Aisha Ram, Chittenden County.
Thanks. So I'm going to get started here. And what I'll say is that there seems to be a great deal of angst about H360. Some of it seems to be disagreement with the results of H360. Today on the floor, we heard the report of the Finance Committee, and there was a unanimous roll call vote to support it. Our committee was asked by Finance to look at two areas: the open meeting law as it affects 3-member boards, and the unusual per diem that was awarded to the members of the board. In addition, we were asked by others to review the issue of whether or not the authority was to be independent, the public records exemptions, and whether or not to establish a summer study committee. Others also asked us to review many other sections of the bill, but they are not in our jurisdiction. For example, overbuilding and interim solutions. So we aren't going to address those at all. At the risk of seeming dictatorial here, I will take one item off our plate. We already addressed the issue of open meetings. Yes, it does mean that 2 members of a 3-member board can't talk to each other about business because they constitute a quorum. So that one we've dealt with that one. I would ask those who are with us here today only to address those other issues that I mentioned. I'm going to take it issue by issue. This may be a little bit unusual from what you're used to testifying in committees when you go in and give general testimony. But what I'm going to do here is go issue by issue for those 4 and ask for comments on them. That we often do that in our committee because then it means we don't have to keep going back and forth and back and forth. So any questions from committee members or anybody? So the first issue is the per diems. Would any of the witnesses here like to talk about the per diems? Holly, I see your hand. And forgive me if I use your first names.
Senator White, I'm honored if you know my first name. Haven't seen you in a long time. My name is Holly Groschner, and I was recently the CEO of Vermont PBS, but at one point I was the general counsel for the VTA. Thank you for hearing these comments. The per diem is unusual. However, the question is it too low? It is very difficult to imagine garnering the time and attention of people with expertise in these areas when they're in extraordinarily high demand in the private sector. So, that we should be so lucky to have the level of expertise we seek here at $250 an hour. That is my comment on this subject.
I don't think it's an hour. I think it's per day.
Per day. Oh, well, even worse. I can tell you that commercial counsel who are doing business transactions and are able in this area charge between $400 and $500 per hour.
I'm sure we, our regular per diem for everybody else is $50 a day. So this is quite,
And I assure you,
stretch for us.
I think that this is such a worthy cause that everybody should want to donate their time to this. But I think just being realistic, it's probably, we know that the money is coming out of the fund itself. And so right-minded managers and right-minded board members will want to conserve this cost in any event.
Thank you. I will say that with your persuasiveness as the CEO of Vermont PBS, you can use your persuasiveness to get people to donate their time. Anybody else like to comment on the per diems themselves? That's all we're talking about now. Irv?
For the record, my name is Irv Tomei. I'm a Norwich resident. I served as chair of EC Fiber from December of 2012 until last May, when I chose to, quote, retire. But my successor as chair asked me to continue as government relations officer. On the subject of per diem, the point was made in Senate Finance Committee discussions that this board will have a lot of homework to do. So the $250 per diem, they can't put in for compensation for the many hours they're going to have to spend reviewing each grant application before they meet to decide on whether to approve it or not. So I think the $250 is eminently reasonable, and as Holly said, it may be dangerously low rather than too high.
So thank you. Our committee members, do you have any comments on this or? No, okay. So now we're going to move to the question of independence of the authority. And I will
Madam Chair, Steve Whitaker, I want to speak to the per diems.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Steve Whitaker, Montpelier. I believe as the language is written, it's $250 per any day they're spent doing their duties. So if they spend 3 or 4 days preparing for a meeting, I believe those are compensatable. But the broader issue of, is the board the right size or is it doomed to fail? There was this considerable discussion on whether the board members would be working board members in the model of the Public Utility Commission, where they would have basically a half-time position and be fully engaged in this work. And that's something that I think squarely on the jurisdiction of this committee is what is going to get the job done properly. You know, we've got decades of failure in telecommunications planning and lack of coordination between the broadband and the telephone and the public safety, et cetera. So I think that you should take it down to the ground level and build up a governing board structure that you think will work and that will be transparent and accountable, and pay them accordingly. I don't think it's as simple as, paying somebody $250 a day versus $500 a day. The real question is what's going to get the job done, and is it going to further exacerbate the siloed and dysfunctional planning that we've seen here today? Thank you.
Well, we're not going to address the responsibilities of the board. We're only addressing those issues that I mentioned. And I will say that in the House bill, they had 7 members. And in the Senate bill, they have 3 members. My guess is that that's probably an issue for debate in the conference committee. Okay. Yes, Irv?
I just wanted to be noted on the record that on this instance, I'm in partial agreement with Mr. Whitaker.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And I want to make sure that we understand that we only have till 2:30 here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to move to the question of independence of authority. And I'm going to tell you what I've learned, and then I will ask for comments from the witnesses. This authority is modeled after the Clean Energy Development Fund, which is housed in the Department of Public Service. It receives administrative support from the department, but operates independently. The members can only be removed for cause, and there is no direct line of reporting to the commissioner or the department. So with that, I will open it up to witnesses who would like to comment on the independence, whether the way it's constructed is independent or not, and if it should be more independent. Holly?
Sorry to jump in, but I'm going to jump in.
No, and please raise your hand if you, and I sometimes don't see those little yellow hands. So just a real physical hand. And Steve, if you, since I can't see you, if you would just speak up. So Holly?
Thank you, Senator White. I think it's very important that the ED is appointed by the governor and is managed by the board. I think it's nearly tragic that the legislation deems how many employees there shall be and that they shall be classified or not. I think that this board and this executive director has a monumental task and should organize it according to their good judgment. So I think the fund is the source of the funding for these positions, and how they staff it, how they do it, should be totally within the jurisdiction of the executive director and the board. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to call on the commissioner because I see her hand up, but I do think that we have to approve any positions. The legislature has to approve positions. So if they organize and come back and say, we need to have additional positions, then we can do that. But that's just the way our legislature works with state positions.
What would it take to not have state positions?
What do you mean?
These should not be state employees.
Consultants.
Well, if they're under the department, I will let the commissioner respond to that.
Good afternoon, committee. It's a pleasure to be here. I think I'm having deja vu because I've been listening to this conversation now for several years, and more specifically this entire legislative session. So Chair White, you can be comforted that your committee is going over exactly the same ground that's been covered in the House and the Senate Finance Committee. To Ms. Groschner's point, whose views I well respect, it would take going outside of state government. And I think the VTA, which is the entity you recall, was constituted that way. And with that, you had the type of flexibility to hire folks as you saw fit. I will tell you from my point of view, I welcomed having positions specified because my experience in state government has been that if you don't have them specified in statute, you have a hell of a time getting people in positions. And we need the assurance that this board is going to be able to get up and running and be staffed. So I suspect, Chair White, that a hybrid here would work where you go with the positions that are for this time specified, recognizing the wisdom of what Ms. Groschner just said, that in all likelihood, as the board gets going, it's going to best know what it needs. And then they will come back to you, which is what I heard the chair of Senate Finance say more than once. Some of this we're going to learn as we go. And if I've seen anything about our dynamics in this past couple of years, it's that process of let's go a mile, let's stop, let's come back to our legislature. It works for us in Vermont. So I would have confidence there. As for the issue of independence, I wanted to simply state to the committee that I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. I have been living with the Clean Energy Development Fund model now for 4 years as the commissioner. I was also familiar with it in years before I joined the department. So happy to answer those questions, but I'll just state for the record that this model of independence works. I know at least it works under my tenure. And I'm sure you could bring in the members of the Clean Energy Development Board to testify to that effect if you had the time. So it's an uncommon model in state government, I think, but it's one that's proved out in the clean energy arena, and one that I think you can trust to here.
Thank you. Not to not to emphasize that, but or call to attention any particular administration, but we did have an administration who asked the Clean Energy Fund to actually do a particular project, and they felt completely independent from the administration and said, no, we can't do that. We're independent and we're going to look at all the projects. We're not going to do it. So they proved, and on that one instance anyway, their independence. Chris?
Yes, and for the record, my name is Chris Campbell, and I was the third executive director of the Vermont Telecom Authority from 2010 to 2015. And prior to that, had spent more than 10 years at the Department of Public Service. Since then, I currently employed by Tilson Technology Management, and one of my activities there is advising other state broadband programs and helping to administer them. So I'm bringing those perspectives to the question. My remarks here are going to be similar to the ones that I gave in House Commerce. I think that this question of being, inside the main line of state government or being outside there are some pros and cons to each of them. So I think the position that I came down with in the House was being in favor of more independence. And I think I also recall saying that while I think I might somewhat prefer a more completely independent model, I thought that a clean energy development kind of model was also could preserve some of the aspects of that independence. So let me talk a little bit about what I think you gain and lose from each of these. So I think completely inside of the main line of state government, you have a high degree of alignment with the administration, and that should provide you with some political support for your activities. It also entails a degree of getting some direction from the administration, as well as their overall priorities. I know that in my time as executive director, I both benefited from the ability to be independent, but also to a degree, especially when it came to a change of administration, there was a bit of a handicap where I hadn't been hired by the administration, and so that I think perhaps impacted somewhat how they viewed the organization. So I think that the idea that the governor appoints the executive director, I think certainly helps to address that issue. I think that probably one of the biggest advantages of a completely independent model is the staffing flexibility that Holly referred to, and I think that actually was a strength of the VTA's independence, is that we were able to be quite nimble and go after folks who had a certain kind of experience and a commercial outlook that was really, really helpful in our work there. So it feels like the proposal that's coming to you carries some of the advantages. I think there's a degree of independence still there. I think that the administration being involved in appointing the executive director perhaps will provide that position with some more political support. I don't think it really sort of fully resolves the issue of the independence and the specificity. It is, having worked in the main line of state government and worked outside of it, it is really hard to get positions in the main line of state government. And sometimes you wind up making suboptimal decisions because of those limitations. So I really found, working in a quasi state entity to be somewhat liberating in that way, where we were, responsible more for the for the budget and the outcomes, and rather than the head count in particular. So that's my perspective on that piece. I will want to introduce one other item into this, and that is, I think actually the issue of independence is somewhat linked to the issue of the sunset. And one of the things that I have consistently advocated for in my testimony on this bill is that I don't think you should be putting a sunset on this. I think that putting a sunset on it will make it harder for this organization to enter into agreements, especially agreements that may have a long life and may be associated with long-term infrastructure or long-term support. I think it'll also make it harder to attract and retain the well-qualified individuals, whether that is there's that level of uncertainty. I will say, I think, perhaps one way to look at this different that really brings it back to the question of independence is to think about what is the trajectory of the organization. So while I think it would be a pretty significant mistake to put a sunset on it, I think it might very well be appropriate to put a destination on it, right? So I think, right now, the way that the legislation is written, that this is very much focused on helping these, with the notable exception of EC Fiber, relatively young organizations get up and running, digest a fairly significant amount of funding, spend it well, build the organizational capacity, get sort of fully launch, right? And I think longer term, I tend to think about an organization like this being more like a shared services organization, right? Where small regional organizations around the state can collaborate on things where, much like the Vermont Public Power Supply Authority, has power planners that support lots of municipal utilities, but the municipal utilities still have their own people to do things that are local, but they can sort of share certain key functions. That might be a very reasonable destination for the organization that's being stood up now. And so, one alternative to sunsetting is really to say, we're, pending legislation changing the trajectory, we're expecting this to sort of migrate out of state government and become really much more aligned with these community public organizations. So I think that's, setting it on a trajectory to greater independence and greater alignment to the long-term support of these organizations that it's helping to support stand up, is an alternative way to look at the independence in conjunction with the sunset.
Thank you. Holly, I saw you had your hand up.
I would just say that by and large, I agree with most everything that Chris Campbell just said. And my comments about independence are really not so much focused on the department or not the department, but rather state employees trying to be commercial employees. And my experience, I led the legal department of a publicly traded company that was in the business of acquiring $4 billion worth of transmission towers to serve the mobile industry. And in that time, I can tell you that everyone was working at an entrepreneurial pace. I see that entrepreneurial pace being very important to the success of this endeavor. And so I don't understand how the executive director and the FTEs can be contained within the marketplace for state employees as opposed to the marketplace for professionals in this field. Thank you.
Okay, committee, any questions, comments? When is the sunset, Chris?
I believe in the current bill, if I'm remembering correctly, it was 2029.
2029. I would I would say that we have 7 months from now until January, and that in January, it would be a time to look at, because the sunset isn't going to be there for another 8 years, it looks like. And to look at that, and also to look at how we thread this issue of state employees versus non-state employees. I think that I just can't see that we can talk now about the trajectory of this and where it's going to go without a lot more discussion and a lot more time. And that we'll be back here in 7 months, and hopefully there'll be some build out and some work done before then, but we can look at the governance structure more fully then. Herb?
With all due respect, Madam Chair, I believe that your comment is relevant to the sunset question, but we can't wait till January to settle the independence question. And I do find Mr. Campbell's comments quite persuasive. And having a sunset of 8 years out is not, in the modern world, few people take a position for that long anymore. I don't think it's going to keep us from finding first-rate talent if the sunset is 8 years out. But the question of independence comes up immediately. And I find both Chris Campbell and Holly Groschner's comments on that topic quite strong. And I mean no disrespect at all to Commissioner Attorney. It is a question of being able to compete for the kind of talent that's needed.
Commissioner Attorney?
Nothing but the deepest respect for all the speakers. I just fundamentally disagree. I've been living with the Clean Energy Development Fund for 4 years. I can testify personally to their independence. What this bill does is enables the executive director to hire individuals to do the work. I completely hear Ms. Groschner about the entrepreneurial pace. I have to tell you, my department has been working at that pace overtime the last year during this pandemic, so I will not stand down at all in asserting their entrepreneurial-minded pace when it comes to getting the people's business done. I know what you folks are saying. We've got to take the first steps, and I think Senate Finance has found a good structure. The conference committee will work this out, and then the governor will decide what he thinks.
And am I right that the House version had a slightly more independent authority?
It did, and the question really is independent from what?
Right.
And what I can tell you is that there isn't a decision that the Clean Energy Development Fund has taken in the last 4 years that I have in any way, shape, or form touched. And they've had an executive director who incidentally is one of your Senate colleagues. And if you have further questions, you might ask him about it.
That's where I got this information.
Yeah. So the question is, how perfect do you want this to be before you've killed it in the quest for perfection? Or do we want to get broadband built this year? If so, I think we move out with what we have now. If there are terrible, terrible kinks in it, they will become manifest in very short order. And then I have every confidence that the legislature, with my assistance as you wish, will work that out. As much as I love Chris and Holly, the VTA came and went, and there are reasons why, and we're trying to sidestep some of those reasons too.
So I see, Chris, I believe you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that I'm clear, specific, and not understood on the point that I'm making, right? So I do believe that having an organization that is constituted as an independent organization with a board attached to the public service department is capable of exercising independent judgment. I take Commissioner Tierney at her word on that, and I've never seen any evidence to the contrary on that. So I think the model of it going to an independent entity attached to a state a department of the state as opposed to just being housed completely in a department does address sort of that decision-making independence issue. On the issue of employees, I want to be, clear and specific, because I was both, a classified and an exempt employee at the Public Service Department. And, that was I've also worked in some other parts of state government. That was one of the, highest esprit de corps, highest commission to mission, highest, one of the least bureaucratic parts of state government that I had, exposure to. So I have nothing with respect for the people who work at the department and the type of employees that the department attracts and who work there. Was one of my best employment experiences working there. The specific thing that I think is the difference that I would highlight doesn't really have something to do with the employees themselves, but really the structure of employment in the main line of state government, right? That's really the thing where there is the difference. It's not the people, it's just, there are certain structures set up in state government, and they're set up for a reason, right? They're not like inherently bad. They do at times come with some disadvantages too.
I'm not sure I know what you mean by the structure of employment in state government.
So, typically it's much harder to it's much harder to create positions. Pay and benefits are structured in a particular way that gives you a lot less flexibility in terms of, tailoring what you're offering to the people that you're trying to attract. Those limitations tend to make the initiation of employment and finding people less nimble and more attractive to some people, but less attractive to other people.
I do agree with that. I think that we do have to, creating positions has to come before the legislature. And I think that what we saw here in this bill is that there are certain positions created, and in January, if they need different positions created, they can come and and the pay structure is an issue. We do have some flexibility in being able to, for certain positions, go outside of the pay, the classification structure, and for certain types of positions, use the market rate instead. I mean, I do know that's there. This committee deals with state employees and the contracts and stuff. So I do know that there is some flexibility there. Senator Polina, I saw you unmuted yourself. Did you have a question or comment?
I guess a comment. I mean, I appreciate this conversation about the independence. I think it's really important. There's a back of my mind though, I keep thinking that it's hard to imagine us making changes between now and we have one more week into the session. But the idea of coming back and revisiting the question sometime, whether it's in January or sometime soon, seems like it's not a bad idea. And I don't know if that has to be written into the bill or anything, but to make it clear that we think it needs to come back for further discussion, which seems good to do that, but not to expect us to be able to make the change now. Just seems unrealistic.
Senator Clarkson?
So Senate as state employment may not be nimble, but the legislature is. And anything that needs to be reviewed can be brought to us at any point, with the exception perhaps of the last week and a half of session. But that we are perfectly capable of reviewing where we are in next session, how some of this is sugaring out, and make adjustments. So it's not like this is static. I mean, this is not, however this gets enacted, it's just, it launches it. And that's the key thing, is we got to get it launched. And we can revisit it at any point after, you can be calling us for bill bill proposals in the fall. So I just want to make sure we all are aware that this is not getting set in stone. This is a work in progress, and we're getting it launched to the best of our abilities now in the best way that we can see with the time constraints we have, and we can work on improving it at any point.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Steve.
I don't think it's quite realistic to think that we can just fine tune this in January. If you, in effect, have limited your potential candidate pool to those willing to work in classified service under the Department of Public Service, you're not going to get the people that are going to make this program a success. Even the CUDs, while they are dependent on their funding so far from the department, they won't speak up. They can't speak up without being retaliated financially, but no one supports having this thing administratively attached to the Department of Public Service. That was a coup that happened in Senate Finance. And so independence is essential from the get-go, so that you're hiring from a bigger talent pool that is more entrepreneurial and skilled, and not those people that we need are not willing to work in the Department of Public Service. So it's fundamentally mistaken to think that we can back out of that dead-end road in next January and not having lost critical time. I mean, at minimum, you need to get a statewide fiber design done so that at least there's a foundation document for next January. But I don't think you're going to be able to reform and rehire or transition folks of one temperament who were willing to work in classified service to others who are willing to work in an independent authority.
So I'm going to make a comment on that. And I think that we have plenty of people working in state employment who would refute your concern that they're unwilling to work in state employment as opposed to an independent authority. And I have to admit that I have not heard from one CUD that they're opposed to the structure, setting it up this way and having the people be state employees. I have 70 people that are connected to my CUD down here, that regular volunteers that volunteer probably every day. And I haven't heard from one of the 70 that they're opposed to this. So I'm not sure where you're getting your information that no one supports this.
Well, I'm not at liberty to share names at this point, but you understand that this has been a fundamental problem with our telecom plan. The folks who, since we created the connectivity division in 2015, that the people who are dependent upon the department for their grants are not willing to say what they really think in public. And it's a flaw. I warned the Finance Committee before they passed that bill in 2015 that they were creating that problem, and they ignored it, and now we're still stuck in a second chapter of the same saga.
Well, I see a couple hands here, but I am going to say that my constituents and the 70 people who are involved in the CUD down here, probably all my constituents, are not at all bashful about coming to me and telling me anything they want to tell me. And they also know that as any information between a constituent and a legislator is confidential information. So that doesn't have to be shared. So I cannot believe that of the 70 people, and I know many of them, that they're not willing to tell me exactly like they see it. And I would suspect that might be true for other CUDs and other volunteers, but I can't speak for the other 230 people across the state that are involved in it. So I saw Senator Clarkson's hand up.
I see that, well, I would just like to say we all got the missive from the Vermont Communications Union Districts Association, which represents all the CUDs and does support this as it is. So I would say, and having the pleasure of representing the grandparent of all CUDs, I do not think that this has been an issue that I've heard about.
So I saw Herb had his hand up.
I just want to confirm that we have never felt intimidated we in EC Fiber have never felt in any way intimidated by the department's ability, position and able to give or withhold grants. This is frankly nonsense. There may be a few minority members of our very large governing board who harbor a greater degree of paranoia towards state government, but they are certainly nowhere near a majority. And I vigorously deny Mr. Whitaker's assertion.
I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, if any of you know the chair of our CUD in our region, Anne Manwaring, she is not about to be intimidated by anybody. So,
for those of us who served with her, we are clear on that.
yes. So Holly, I see you had your hand up.
So since I sort of opened this topic and I'm being amused by the fact that the chat just, or the captioning on this.
Oh, wait, so there's a chat? We don't use chat.
No, I'm sorry.
Well, it does say one chat.
No,
it's
it's captioning. She's talking about our captioning.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, the captioning references Pearl Harbor because of the way that this voice translation happens. My comment was intended to be this. It wasn't personal against the people who I greatly respect at the DPS. It wasn't personal as to state employment generally. It was about flexibility and the prospect of attracting people from a commercial sector. That's my best advice to you, impractical though it is at this moment.
Thank you, Holly. That's yes. All right, I'm going to suggest that we switch to the next issue on here, which was the issue of the public records exemption. And I'm going to again, and I'm sorry if I'm seeming a little dictatorial here about how I'm doing this, but I think that we have such limited time here and I want to make sure we get through and then have some time for committee discussion. So I'm going to read something that Tucker Anderson sent to me. And Tucker, you're there. I know you're there. So I am attributing this to you. I'm not plagiarizing. So this is the issue of Section 11 in the Senate bill that talks about the exemptions to public records. And here's Tucker's response. Under current law, municipalities may withhold trade secrets and other confidential business information. This includes their confidential business information and any that they receive from other enterprises. In Vermont, there is binding legal precedent concerning the application of the trade secrets exemption to records produced or acquired by municipalities. Long versus City of Burlington, 2018. Under the trade secrets exemption, a municipality may withhold information, in quotes, which a commercial concern makes efforts that are reasonable under the circumstances to keep secret, and which gives its own user or owner an opportunity to obtain business advantage over competitors who do not know it or use it, end of quote. So long as the information meets this test, the municipality may apply the trade secrets exemption. A municipality may apply this exemption to a municipal enterprise. H360 expresses the legislative intent that CUDs, who are municipalities, are allowed to apply the trade secret exemptions like any other Vermont municipality. In addition to the trade secret test expressed above, the legislative intent further clarifies that CUD business information, quotes again, shall be available for public inspection after project completion, end of quotes. this section might pose challenges for CUDs. It could compare, the last thing I read there, shall be available for public inspection after project completion. This section might pose challenges for CUDs. It would compel the release of some otherwise confidential trade secrets or underlying data that would otherwise be confidential as they relate to other projects. For example, some financial formulas might be used for several projects, but revealing those formulas at the close of one project could threaten another ongoing project. That's from Tucker, and I believe he has, well, that's from Tucker. And so would anybody like to comment on the issue of public records exemption? Irv?
Thank you. This is of considerable concern to us in the CUDs, certainly in EC Fiber, because with that last sentence, as it stands right now in Section 11, it actually serves to weaken the protections that Tucker has just cited. Another example of confidential information and trade secrets would have to do with the exact location of certain parts of the network. There's a security question, again, a security issue protecting against potential terrorism. If every darn detail of the design and structure of the network is open to public inspection. On balance, we would rather see Section 11 deleted entirely. It appears from Tucker's comments that the first sentence of Section 11 doesn't add anything to what's already there. The second sentence of Section 11, it has only the two, weakens what's already there. So I think we'd rather see that deleted entirely. Or if it can't be, at least we'd like to see the second sentence deleted, but take it all out.
So thank you, Irv. I did fail to mention, I think that this second section, second sentence of the section that shall be available for public inspection after project completion does not in general apply to other municipality information. It is similar to the location of property exemption when you're talking about a specific property. And so that's what it relates to, but not other kind of trade secret information. So anybody have any comments on that section? Tucker, did I get that right?
Yes, Madam Chair, Steve Whitaker.
Okay. And Tucker just shook his head. Yes, I got it right. So Steve?
These are municipalities. This is a huge divergent from transparency of public records law. These are municipalities and they're spending public money. And what you're doing here is you're throwing a big dark hood over the heads of anyone wanting to question. And I'll use an example that Irv just brought up of we had network failures that implicated 911 calls. And when a public records request was made of EC Fiber, they claim we don't have to share all that. Our records aren't held by EC Fiber. We offshore them with ValleyNet, and ValleyNet's a nonprofit, so they don't have to share them either. And it has created, and there's real question of whether EC Fiber can sustain the emerging competition from Consolidated. If they're $50 million in debt and their $110 rates are going to be undermined by 60%, we could see EC Fiber be our first CUD bankruptcy. So this kind of transparency and accountability is eviscerated by this claim that these CUDs are in a trade or entitled to trade secret protections. I'm surprised that Tucker's memo did not address the issue of the Winooski v. Burlington Roman Catholic Church, whatever case, where municipal enterprises that did invoke trade secret protection forfeited their sovereign immunity, which these CUDs may need, more importantly, when a 911 call gets blocked and someone dies. So I'm just saying this is a very complex issue, and it is squarely in the jurisdiction of your committee, but it has not been, there's insufficient time to address this. And so, as Irv said, existing law, trade secret exemption, I think it's unfortunate that your committee and the legislature is shuttling these things out to private advocates to have to litigate them because we don't do good committee work. So this is one where it fully needs to be resolved. We're told that these CUDs are formed to address a market failure where there is no competition, and we're going to fill the unserved and underserved areas. So it's not as if there's competition there that we need to put our plans and our designs in secret. So I'll stop there.
Well, I'm going to call on Herb for a minute here to address some EC Fiber comments, but I do want to say that this municipality is also functioning in a slightly different role, and any municipality at all, the town of Putney, could use the trade secret exemption if they conform to the test that what I read about, if a commercial concern makes efforts that are reasonable under the circumstances to keep secret, and which gives its user or owner an opportunity to obtain business advantage over competitors who do not know it or use it. So it's already been decided that municipalities can do that in this 2018 case. So Herb?
Well, first, I'd like to correct a couple of misstatements of fact. Actually, I heard many misstatements of fact last Friday. I'll just focus on one or two right now. EC Fiber's base rate is not $110. Mr. Whitaker has confused our average revenue per user with our base rate, which is $72 a month, not $110. Second, it has been asserted that, quote, $50 million of public funds are at risk. That isn't true either. Our borrowing is entirely revenue bonds, and the terms of the bonds do not give the bondholders the right to seize the net physical assets of the network. That's a very important thing to understand. Third, I would like to point out that we have over several years seen that when potential competitors who have not seen fit to provide service in a given area learn from our make-ready applications for preparing polls where we plan to go next, then they think it's important to go there. This is an example of the commercial competitive question. Fourth, I would point out that because we are required by law to publish our budgets, there is no concealment here of how we are spending our money. That's a public record. The private enterprises that don't want to bother, but they don't want anybody else to bother either with rural Vermont, they aren't required to divulge any details of their plans or their budgets. All we're seeking here is a level playing field. Thank you.
Thank you. Holly?
When I was general counsel of the VTA, we were operating under the public records law. And I can tell you that Ann Galloway and I had many a tussle over what was proprietary and what was not. The law worked, and it worked effectively to sustain the confidentiality while we negotiated agreements and while we entered into individual agreements. That's at least how I remember it. And I can tell you that it does, no matter how we attempt to affect an amendment to this law, it's really important that there be consistency in this case, because it's going to be difficult enough, but to put additional burden on this on CUDs and entities operating to acquire public funds, it has a chilling effect on participation. And thank you, Commissioner Tierney, for nodding your head.
So Holly, would you suggest that the current law works just fine and we could just eliminate section 11 entirely?
That was a yes.
Any other comments? Committee? You've all been very quiet, but I've been,
Commissioner Tierney's had her hand up for a while.
oh, I'm sorry. Your hand was kind of out. Okay, sorry.
Not at
Thank
all.
you.
I
Thank
know
you,
this is
Senator
not
Blaine.
easy, Chair White. Again, I have nothing but the highest regard for Holly's views, and of course, I disagree. I have been dealing with this dynamic now for 2 years, involving the CEDs and questions around the degree to which their business plans have to be made public. And this is an area where I think it's enormously important to put the focus of the CED's energies where they belong right now, which is on the enterprise nature of the activity that they've been commissioned to undertake. And they have struggled mightily in this area and expended far more intellectual and personnel energy than should have been exacted from them because there wasn't clarity about whether they had to produce these documents or not. I was very interested to hear Mr. Anderson's opinion, and I'd be delighted to look at the memo. It's been a few years since I've practiced law, so I'm not the most conversant in the most recent decisions on this point. But I can tell you that my agency has struggled to keep up with the public records demands, and I don't question for 1 second our obligation to do that. I cannot imagine the CEDs who are comprised of volunteers who spend their off hours doing this work, trying to put the kind of resources into compliance that we put in. My own suggestion through this session has been that there simply be a delay, that you simply carve the confidentiality out for 3 years so that the records are perfectly visible in due course, but at a point in time where there's no risk of harm to the CUD of disclosure of their plans. And I think that's a fair balance of the interests here. So respectfully, Holly, I disagree that there's no need to do something. And I think, I'll leave it there.
So I am going to ask you a question, then I'm going to go to Holly, but
Yes, ma'am.
the bill only says shall be available for public inspection after project completion.
Yeah.
So Tucker's, one of his concerns, and I think it's Herb's also, is that the example he gives, some financial formulas might be used for several projects, and revealing those formulas at the close of one project could threaten another ongoing project. So it isn't at the completion of a project. I think that is, that could be very harmful here because the way it's written.
Yeah, I'm afraid I can't speak to that, Chair White, because I haven't seen the analysis. I was more speaking to the policy need to give you comfort that the legislature should be affording the CUDs a protection here. I think the moment you realize that we're talking about sending them into a market landscape, period, tells you that we are taking a governmental function and asking that function to operate in a landscape that the government doesn't usually operate in.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the touchstones of a market landscape is the ability to keep your close information private, because it's the thing that helps you make decisions about where to take your enterprise. And so the asymmetry of requiring the CUDs to conduct themselves as a strictly governmental entity, even when the law itself recognizes that there are times when government does and does not act in a commercial capacity, is feeding an interest in immediate real-time disclosure that is excessive when you consider the harm that is presented simply because of the enormous resources that these folks are having to invest in trying to stay clear on this question of whether they do or do not have to produce this record or that record at a moment when their attention really needs to be on how good is our plan, how good is our prospect, how well are these resources committed in this direction. I just think it's a misdirected focus and you should alleviate their burden. I'm happy to look at any analysis anybody has out there, but I can't speak to the specifics of the language.
Holly?
It's interesting that Commissioner Tierney frames this as a benefit to the CUDs, and the CUDs are very worried about this benefit. So the capacity to respond to open records requests is a real thing. However, it seems to me that one of the things we're forgetting here is these decisions could be made at the board level, at the BCCB level. What should be disclosed and in what time frame? One solution here is to make this a policy that is settled by this board, because the data that seeks to be disclosed are the projects that are being brought to the board and the grants that are being discussed in that context. So I offer that as maybe an intermediary solution.
Would you repeat
Yeah.
that? You would suggest that maybe the authority?
Make a determination of what is proprietary and create a policy for when disclosures will be made with regard to projects that are funded or considered for funding with grants from the fund.
Or Steve, I see you. I don't know if you're muted or not, but we can't hear you. Okay, Herb, I see you had your.
I would repeat my position, however. I'd just like to see that second sentence struck. But I think Holly proposes an interesting possibility. Leave the decision as to what ultimately will need to be disclosed up to the board that is reviewing the applications and making the grants. That's an interesting alternative. I don't think I object strongly to that concept.
I'm going to ask Senator Polina.
I just want to be clear on what's being meant by that. In other words, you're talking about a across the board decision, not per application.
That's true, isn't it? That's why I favor striking that second sentence, because the first protection does apply to trade secrets and confidential information that a CUD may acquire during negotiation with potential partners to build their network. And it may make it more difficult to negotiate with and find a willing partner if the entity that you're negotiating with knows that it can't be fully honest with you about what it's on. I say you with a CUD as to what's concerning it, given that that's all going to get divulged when the project is complete. I really think that that second sentence needs to be stricken.
But if we went, I just want to be clear. Going back to what Holly suggested about having the board make a decision as to what information is available and not, it would be across the board in policy. It wouldn't vary by project to project. That's my guess. Is that true?
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to be clear on that. Thank you.
If I may disagree with my good friend and colleague, Holly, I think the board's going to have an awful lot to do in the next 6 to 12 months.
Well, that's true.
Tying them up, trying to figure out an across the board policy to identify all sorts of data related to CUDs that does or does not have to be open eventually to public inspection. I think that's a significant distraction and diversion of their energy.
I'll leave it to you two to debate that question.
Thank you, Senator Polina. And this is a question that could be debated till the cows come home, and maybe it's one we should leave to the department to figure out. The fact of the matter is that I do have to agree with both Commissioner Tierney and with Mr. Tomei that the prospect of a commercial entity having their negotiation process plan and range of latitude, as in we're willing to do this and we're not willing to do that, was if it's threatened that it will be divulged, that was actually experienced as a deterrent to people in the commercial sector participating at the VTA. Chris, I think if you remember that as well, I'd be grateful for your confirmation. But the fact of the matter is that I think the real problem here is that this thing about doesn't have to be divulged until the end of the plan undercuts what is proprietary. So what was attempted to be a benefit, I had never thought of it as such until June said so, is in fact a limitation on interpretation of proprietary. And so I think anything we can do to protect as proprietary those discussions is important. And I'm sorry, but that's an ongoing subject area that these municipal-like organizations have to deal with as a function of who they are.
So I'm going to make a suggestion here. We have one topic left. And what I'm going to suggest is committee, if you have, I actually did something that I probably shouldn't have done earlier. And I had Maria and Tucker do an amendment that would remove the second sentence from this section. And I don't know if we want to talk about that now or if we want to move on to the summer study committee and then have the discussion about that later. I don't know where other committee members are about that, but I am a little reluctant to take out the whole thing just because I think that Commissioner Turney is, while the public records law, it might not need to be here, it will help them, it will help the CUDs.
Madam Chair,
Madam Chair, Gail needs you.
Gail has her hand up.
Senator Polina, appropriations is ready for you.
I just got a message though saying that scratch that. It said scratch that. We'll have to reschedule.
Oh, never mind then.
It's okay.
I think our chair is.
Madam Chair. Oh, when I get my turn, Steve Whitaker.
Wait a minute. Jeanette seems to be frozen. Let me call her and tell her. Hold on.
You're muted, Senator Clarkson.
For good reason, Mr. Whitaker.
There she is.
Her visual's there.
Has she come back? I don't see her now. Oh, yes, she has come back in. So maybe. Well,
her location is visible. Her person is not.
Her person has disappeared, and I'm going to try and I'll try her one more time because that often works.
I think she's just doing this to make a point about broadband.
Aha.
There she is.
Okay, are you back with us, Chair?
Yeah, I just got kicked out and I thought we lost our internet, but we didn't. It was just me that got kicked out.
It just was you because actually your phone rang as normal. So I knew you hadn't lost power or the internet. So I'm glad you're back in so we can continue.
So the question was whether or not to go ahead with talking about the amendment or to talk about summer study.
Do you want to move on to the summer study or are you?
I think we
Can I
should,
speak on
personally, I
this?
think we should finish that thought.
Okay,
finish our list personally.
okay. So
And then
we'll
come
move on
I
back-
to-
speak?
and then come back to the amendment?
That's my thought.
Yeah.
okay. Anybody have a different idea? Yes, Steve?
Yeah, I think it's important to recall that our statutory framework for telecommunications planning is found in 30 VSA 202D, and it very explicitly lays out a transparent public participatory process. What these CUDs are doing is telecommunications planning, and you basically are putting inadvertently, I don't think it's intentional, I think it's just reckless. You're basically cleaving off this broadband initiative as if it weren't part of our telecommunications planning, and you're beginning to allow people to do their dealing in secret. And that is totally contravening our existing statutory framework. And I would ask you to go read 30 VSA 202D and lay all the protections of participation and transparency in drafts. I'm surprised no one's mentioned it, but the first draft of our first ever revised telecommunications plan was due yesterday, and it's been requested, and it's not been produced, and it is very pertinent to this discussion. It should be informing it, but it is reckless to be starting to deviate and treat broadband planning as if it weren't telecommunications planning and undermine the statutory transparency and participation that has been law since 1987.
Thank you. And I'm going to call on Holly in a minute here. I did read that. I just read it about 20 minutes ago, or about an hour and a half ago. And this is around the planning. This is not about the business plans or the execution of the plan necessarily. And I think that there's a huge difference here. We're talking about information that's part of a business plan that's very different than a planning aspect in my mind. And I did read it, and I still think that we need to protect the information that the CUDs, just as we do for all municipal endeavors. And it's very clear in the law that municipal enterprises are protected and from disclosure of information that would disadvantage them. So I respectfully disagree with you. So I'm going to call on Holly.
Well, I'd be highly redundant here, Chair White, in as much as I agree with you entirely. What the CUDs are doing is implementing the telecom plan. So many of the decisions that the CUDs are utilizing in their process of creating projects come directly out of the guidance of the DPS and the telecom plan. And they're to be applauded for that. And you have to wonder, when somebody is making a recommendation for additional public input for a process that's been decades in the making, when they recommend commercial and technical expertise by insisting on public participation, and when they talk about the fact that we need more planning when implementation has been the barrier to success, you have to think that that person is looking to sustain the status quo. And then you add to that the fact that there is a request to consider mobile as part of this initiative. And there's a request to look at wireless or to be more agnostic as the kind of service that's provided. You have to then ask, who is that person representing? Because I can tell you for certain that one of the failures of the VTA was not the fact that we went out and found more commercially oriented employees, but rather that there was such a broad range of things to do, broadband and mobile, that was, and then a whole other host of political landscape things, that feature of trying to boil the ocean to solve all communication problems in Vermont was a death knell from the outset. So I'm really encouraging the committee to recognize that this bill is appropriately scoped as it is, that is appropriate to the implementation phase, and that it's important to move forward without delay.
Thank you, Holly. Irv?
I will say here to Holly. And as a segue to your next topic, I would like to point out that the summer study proposal is yet another means of delay. I was going to ask, has there ever been any version of a telecom plan that did not point to the need for universal broadband? The CUDs are working on implementing that fundamental state objective. I would strongly disagree with the contention that a single top-down state plan for broadband networks across the state. I don't think that makes sense. I think appropriate planning is region by region within the state. That's why it's appropriate for the CUDs, which take plenty of public input, which represent close to the ground input from individual citizens. I think it's appropriate that CUDs in different parts of the state are free to develop somewhat different approaches to this broad problem of getting broadband to everybody who's on the power grid. Now, with respect to the summer study, I heard an assertion last Friday that there's no rush, that nobody's ready to spend money yet. That's just plain false. There are between $20 and $25 million worth of projects ready to build this summer. The CUDs do not want to miss this construction season. Vermont does not want to miss this construction season. Let's go. Thank you.
How do you feel about let's go?
We agree.
I meant Irv. You were very forceful there.
All I know is
Yeah.
it hailed at my house this morning, so this construction season is really going to be a short one.
Hey, I will say the construction season has already begun in Woodstock. AOT is hard at it.
Commissioner Tierney?
A couple things. One, amen to what Irv and Holly said. Secondly, just by way of anecdote, last summer after the department developed the Emergency Broadband Action Plan draft, I socialized that up and down the state, left and right, with anybody I could find to talk to, whether it was regional planning commissions, business groups, community action groups, stakeholders in state government, VEDA, legislators, everywhere. One of the conversations that stuck with me throughout the year was the one I had with Tom and Mary Evslin, where Tom said in retrospect he wished that they had done less planning and more doing. And the thing to keep in mind is we've spent over $2 million now in the last year and a half on planning at different levels, whether in state government or at the community level or otherwise. And the 330 citizens, at least that's the number I'm aware of, who've been deeply engaged in this work have been doing that planning, and they've been doing it on a community basis. So it's granular in a way that state government planning isn't always. So I commend the legislature for resourcing and giving these folks the mandate that they clearly want, and that I think history has shown us is needed to get this job done. If you have to go back to the root of all evil, it was probably the 1996 Telecommunications Act in Congress that committed the internet to market dynamics to begin with. That was a policy decision that was made. America is living with both the benefit of that and also the detriment. And there is no solution coming out of Washington, D.C. anytime soon for this. We have now spent close to 30 years looking to the market to solve these market gaps. The market has told us what the market's going to do. And now Vermont, by the grace of God, has a success story in the form of EC Fiber to point to say, hey, there is a way for us to address this very pressing public policy issue. So I think we need to go forward. If you want to have another study committee, I've participated in many legislative study committees over the years. I've always found them to be very productive and very engaging. On the other hand, I would simply add this to what Irv and Holly were saying. I counsel against anything that's going to delay the work that these communities are doing. You do not want to demoralize them at this point by throwing hurdles in their way. And secondly, to the extent that there is a problem, Madam Chair, I come from a tradition of law where conflict is resolved by taking evidence, by testing that evidence, by making sure of your facts, and as opposed to resting on assertion. And so if it is your considered judgment that there really are problems as devastating as have been repeatedly represented to you in this legislative session, then perhaps you should consider using the tool that this legislature has crafted for resolving matters like that. And that would be to call upon the Public Utility Commission to do fact finding for you and to ascertain, is there in fact a problem with our connectivity and our integrated, or as I've heard, lack of integrated systems, and let them give you a report on that. But I would urge you above all to make sure that your decisions rest on facts and not assertions, not opinions, not positions. I will tell you, sitting where I am as a regulator, I'm aware of a lot of problems in this state, but problems about emergency systems, for instance, have not risen to the top for me. I'm not saying that these systems aren't important. I'm simply saying that if there were a problem of the dimension that has been represented to you, I would know about it. And if we're really going to go there, then you should have the people in on this conversation who can tell you factually what the state of our system is, what the need is for resources, what the need is for future planning, and the like. And that rests in the Department of Public Safety, not at the Department of Public Service. And I thank you very much for this opportunity to give you those comments.
Thank you. And I also know, or I think I know, that the auditor plans to do some kind of a performance audit over the summer. So I would suspect that what might make sense is for us to wait for that audit to come to find out what he sees as issues in the system and take it up in January, rather than have a summer study committee, which will define issues that some of them have already been addressed, not to everyone's satisfaction, but have been addressed, and some that will be addressed as we go forward. So
Good.
Anybody?
I would agree with you, Madam Chair.
Anybody else? Where are we here now?
I just want to say thank you. I know this is a complex issue. This committee has been so thoughtful, and I really appreciate the time and attention you've given these questions. So from an innocent bystander, hats off to you.
And I also would like to thank you for the opportunity to participate in this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Well,
Madam,
thank you.
Chair,
You have faded.
can you hear me?
Off and on.
I'd like to speak to the summer study issue.
Yep.
Some of the key factors of whether we're going to rely on the distribution utilities in the Washington Electric Co-op model to get fiber done, due to the lack of capacity in the subcontractor market, is a fundamental issue. Because if we basically rely on CUDs to develop jigsaw puzzle pieces that might not fit together, and then have those reviewed and or approved or amended or rejected by the board and sent back for redesign, it's a very inefficient process. Whereas some of the questions that are posed for a summer study committee is the most effective way to get this fiber built within the 3.5 years we have remaining access to this couple $100 million, is to use the distribution utilities. That's not something you can kick off till January. Same with the statewide design by which the CUD regional plans will be measured for interoperability and resilience. if you're going to design for broadband only and have to go back and redesign a network for public safety and cellular. That's likely similarly inefficient. And you know well that governance of telecommunications consolidation has been on the back burner in your committee for 3 years now, and you've got flaws or inaction that now is the time to solve if we're going to get this thing on track. So the summer study committee has plenty of issues to work with, and now adding the trade secrets issue, actually, I think it was already in the list at number 19 or 20, is still your best bet to have informed decisions made next January. These committees of jurisdiction will be in the same boat next year. Too little awareness, too little facility with the topics, and not enough time to do them justice. So a summer study committee along the lines of the AMO committee that was done last year is your best way to hedge your bets that we will not waste this funding.
So I'm a little bit confused here because you're asking for a summer study committee to look at, to not do anything until, so that nothing is done until there's a coordinated plan, which means we'll lose.
No, I'm not asking that, Madam Chair. So I apologize for the interruption. I think that the regional projects that are in progress should proceed, but they may fail when this board gets convened and has to approve them because their interoperability designs may or may not pass muster. But I'm not suggesting the summer study committee as a delay tactic, but more as a deep dive into all the complex issues which these committees have failed to address. And those are laid out. I can see the nodding heads. I think the issues, a lot of time and a lot of discussion with smart people was used in identifying those issues that have not been adequately fleshed out. And it's essential that you make good decisions next January, and you need information that you won't get any other way to do that.
Okay, well, I am reluctant to set up a summer study committee. I don't know how the other committee members feel here, but I think that we need to get this bill going. We need to, as Irv put it so calmly, go and not miss this construction season by causing any confusion in the CUDs whatsoever, and let them go forward. And if we need to, in the fall, or in January, look at these other questions, we can do so then. But I'm very reluctant at this point, unless other committee members feel differently, to try to set up a summer study committee and give them a charge that is doable, but that doesn't confuse the current CUDs and the projects that are undergoing and the authority of the board. So other committee members?
I support your position, Madam Chair.
Senator Colmore, I saw your hand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I haven't said a word. You probably
I
know. I feel very much like I'm drinking from a fire hose on this because it's kind of like an octopus being dropped in your lap. There's so many tentacles to it that I haven't been able to grab onto anything. So I've been very attentive listening. And I think there's at least 2 or 3 areas where the great majority of folks who testified do agree. There are other areas where they don't. And so I think as a committee, we can have some discussion about the common ones. But I do, I guess I'm never much in favor of study committees to begin with. I think we use a lot of resources that could be better spent in other places. So I agree with you, at least on this one. I don't see it as a benefit.
Senator Polina, Senator Rahm.
I agree with what you had said earlier about the difficulty of putting together a summer study committee and whether it would be worth it at this point.
Senator Rahm.
But I think about it a little bit the way I think about the pension issue, which we got thrown on our laps early in this session. we were able to wade through it and make some important decisions over time without having had done a study. We didn't do a summer study committee. We educated ourselves and we got together in January.
Senator Ram?
So, I mean, I guess I'm listening for something compelling to, change the course of the bill in any material way, given that the committees of jurisdiction have really done a thorough job, as well as, what Irv and others have said about the importance of utilizing these dollars now and iterating and trusting our CUDs. I didn't know that Ann Manwaring was in charge of your CUD, but I think there are people who are, as smart or smarter than us, who are much closer to the progress that we can make, who are really, really trying to get broadband out into their communities. And I don't see any way that we can add significant value today.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Can we go back to the issue of the public records exemption, to Irv's suggestion to drop that last sentence? Senator Clarkson?
I would support that our amendment, and I haven't seen your amendment, but I would support our striking the second sentence.
That's all the amendment does.
Can someone point me back to the page number? This is Maria Royal's document.
But it's in today's calendar. I just never left the Senate calendar. It's on page
You mean
6 of today's Senate calendar.
You mean the section of the bill itself?
It's section
11.
It's on page 35 of the draft.
Thank
Senator
you.
Rom.
Could I ask the chair to just read that sentence again?
I can read it.
Well,
Yes.
someone, sure. Rather than
Thank you,
all of
Brian.
us fiddling through our papers trying to find a section, it's only one
Section.
sentence.
Section 11 reads, the purpose of this section is to clarify that any records or information produced or acquired by a district that are trade secrets or confidential business information shall be exempt from public inspection and copying pursuant to 1 VSA, period. Second sentence, such records or information shall be available for public inspection after project completion.
And that's the sentence that I've asked to be deleted.
Sure. And the first sentence is basically is current law.
Correct.
It just makes it clear that it's the that the CUDs are also
Right.
have that.
They have the power of municipalities.
Yeah.
I don't see any reason. I don't see why we'd just go with the current law.
Well, the second sentence. Okay, you mean you want to leave the whole section
No,
there?
No, I would just keep the first sentence there, which is
Oh.
current law,
Right.
and not keep the second sentence.
And include, yeah.
I don't know if this is where June had the commissioner had a possible modification to 3 years. I was sympathetic to that, but I also think someone could try to sort of delay and litigate and game things out for 3 years otherwise. So I don't see that necessarily solving the problem, but I'd be curious.
Commissioner?
Yeah, I think the gist of my concern is addressed if you leave the first sentence in. If you
Okay.
can't be comfortable with what I've suggested by way of 3-year window, I would leave that be then and simply strike the second sentence.
Right.
The most important thing is the first sentence.
Okay, that's helpful.
Other committee members?
I would also favor deleting the second sentence.
All right. So I believe Maria and Maria, somebody has done a draft amendment, and I just wonder if everybody wants to be on it.
Sure.
Sure.
This is our one change?
Yes, it's our
Sure.
one sentence deletion, and I vote yes.
Okay. Thank you, Maria.
You're welcome.
Tucker, are you okay with that? Okay. All right. thank you. And I thank everybody for being here. And my pledge is that in January, we will start looking more comprehensively at telecommunications authority governance structures in the state, just so that we're more familiar with it. And we'll start in January so we don't get caught in May in this position. And we'll have you all back then.
And
help
we'll have
us.
a field trip in between to visit all the CUDs. And
Is that what we're calling them, is CUDs? Do you know what that is?
Well, it's Vermont. You know, we're familiar with CUDs.
Yeah, they regurgitate 7 times.
Madam Chair, if
Yes,
I
sir.
may, I think it was probably not your intention, but way back when your committee helped finalize the form of Chapter 82 of Title 30, creating CUDs, I
Right.
think you had a part in changing the name from telecommunication union districts to communication union districts. And at the time, some of us actually wondered if you had a little bit of humor in mind in adopting CUD.
Well, maybe CUDs are very much like the legislature. We regurgitate at least 7 times.
If only we had 2 stomachs.
Well, we could all agree that it's better than a TUD.
Yes, much better.
All right. Well, thank you for putting up with our slightly irreverent comments.
Thank you so much for letting us participate. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll invite you all back in January.
Thank you and it's always a pleasure to have the commissioner too. We don't get in our committee very often. But it's great to see my constituents here. And I mean, I have to say, for those of us who've been representing EC Fiber for a very long time, for us to go from being so outside to being the model for some of this work is really exciting. So the mills of the gods grind slowly, but they grind exceeding fine.
Well, I do remember the day that Irv came rushing into government operations and said, "You've got to help us with this governance structure." We had about 20 minutes.
Oh, I think as I remember, you spent 2 or 3 days on it, and we were very grateful for it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Madam Chair, may I note that you didn't hear from the 3 people that I did recommend, Cliff and Krista Shute and Cliff Duncan and Ken Jones, all of whom.
If I can, Krista could not be with us until after 3. We had invited her. She could not be here. Cliff wanted to talk about overbuild, and I clearly said we weren't going to talk about overbuild. And I do not remember what Ken Jones' issue was, but that's why, because we weren't going to talk about overbuild, and that was Cliff's concern. So that's why. Holly?
Chair White, can I also point out that Krista Shute did offer written testimony, and her testimony is quite consistent with mine. So,
okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
I did ask her if she would do that. All right. Okay. Thank you. All right, we're going to move on to our next issue here, which is elections bill, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye, and enjoy your break.
What break?
You'll get a break.
All right. Let's see, I believe we're moving to the changes with S15. Is that what I asked?
Yes.
Okay. Would you like to, because it was on the floor today, and we would like some, a review of what the House actually did.
Have they finished? I mean, do we know that are they done with it now? The floor action? Or are they still on the floor?
They are done for the day.
They're done.
Finished that earlier.
Going to
Okay.
3rd reading. though, Senator Clarkson.
Thanks, Will.
So Will or Ameren, who wants to let us know here what they did?
I can start, and Will, if you want to add on, that is helpful. Okay. I asked Gail to post at least 3 documents for this. The report of House Government Operations, with which they did a strike all to make some changes throughout the bill. And then there were 3 proposals of amendment that were heard on the floor this morning. 2 of them were approved, one from the House Appropriations Committee, and then one from Representative McCarthy from Government Operations. So I will start with the House Government Operations Report strike all version. And I think I will just sort of hit where there was a change.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we don't need to go.
Okay.
You just tell us.
Okay. All right.
And I think I just got kicked off. I can't.
No, you're still with us.
Oh, I don't get this at all. It's telling me to join a meeting.
Well, we don't have a meeting till 4.
Oh, no. I was trying to go to the, never mind. I was trying to go to our page and it keeps, okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm finding it on our page. The House proposal amendment is the number, it's a long bill, right? Not just the 2 pagers.
Their amendment is just 2 pages.
So is that all we're gonna look at?
No, hold on. I actually have not checked to see what's posted. Let me check.
Yeah, because there are 3 things posted, as you said. The HGO amendment, the McCarthy amendment, and the House Approps amendment. And I thought you suggested we go to the HGO amendment.
Oh,
it's only 2 pages though.
That is actually the appropriations amendment. Gail, did I send you the wrong document?
I might have switched the labels. I know I was posting and reposting, so I can double check everything here.
It looks like we have the House Appropriations Amendment posted twice.
Yep, yes. It is. Correct.
Let me.
So the HGO amendment is what we need, because we have a House Approps amendment clearly marked.
Okay, Gail, yeah, the correct link is in my email, so you should have it and be able to post it.
I'll forward that email to everybody on the everybody in the room.
Can you also post it?
Yeah, I will post it.
Okay.
We will refresh.
But first I'll send it to you so that you have it in your inbox.
Okay, thank you. I don't think I've ever heard this committee be so silent.
Could have taken a. I might stand up.
It's under, sorry to bother you. Should be in your inbox now.
Okay, and let us know when it's posted, because I want to do it that way. I see it. It has pages and lines, and when you post,
I got it.
As opposed to in email.
It's 37 pages long. If I'm looking at the right one.
Yes, you should be looking at one that's 37 pages.
I am not. Is it on our website?
It's a link in your email. There's 3 different amendments.
I know, but is it also posted?
It's
working on it.
Oh, okay. Okay.
She's getting there. She's getting there.
Senator White, if I may, while you all are waiting,
yep.
If anyone's curious, the roll call vote on the House floor this morning to go to third reading was 119 to 30.
Oh, okay, good.
Yep.
Well, that's a pretty strong vote. Good.
And I could preface Amarin's walkthrough, but by saying there weren't a whole lot of substantive changes. And the substantive changes that were made, my office supported. But it'll be important for you guys to check them out and understand what they did.
Sometimes there's a little bit of a lag posting, but you can refresh and try now.
Okay.
Well, it made a responsive thing, so.
Oh, well, I'll just go to my email
Yeah.
because it doesn't seem to like my refresh. Okay, I guess we've all got it some way or other. So can we start?
Certainly.
And Amarin, if you just walk us through where they made changes, that would be great.
Okay. All right, now let me find where I left my version. Okay. So the first substantive change is on page, let me make sure I have the right page here, is on page 12. And this is in the section on, let's see, this is section 8, title 17, section 2539, delivery of early voter absentee ballots. And we are specifically looking at the circumstances where.
Wait a minute, where are you on page 12?
So I'm going to kind of walk you down to where the changes. So you'll see in subdivision 3A on page 11, the circumstances that we're looking at is if a voter transfers his or her registration from another town or city in the state following the mailing of ballots to all active voters by the Secretary of State's office. Mm-hmm. So then if you scroll down onto page 12, now we're looking in subdivision B, beginning on line 13. We're looking at if a voter registers to vote for the first time in Vermont, following the time when the Secretary of State's office generated the address file to be used for the mailing of ballots to all active registered voters by the Secretary of State's office. This now reads, the clerk shall either issue a ballot to the voter in person at the time of registration or mail a ballot to the voter within 3 business days, provided the voter's registration does not occur within 5 days of the election. If the clerk does not have ballots available at the time of registration, the clerk shall mail a ballot to the voter within 3 business days after obtaining ballots. So previously, this said that if a voter registers to vote for the first time, then the, now I've lost my.
Previously, if you want me to help that thought, Amarin, I had to remind myself, and I went back and looked at your version. This changes. Previously, they had to make a request. Sorry, Amarin.
That's all right. They had to make a request, and then the ballot would be issued to that voter pursuant to subdivision 1 of this subsection A. So, it's not too dissimilar. It's just being clear that it does not need to be on request, and then it puts these day limits that if they're going to mail it, it has to be within 3 business days, and that they're not going to mail it within 5 days of the election. And if the clerk, and then addressing the circumstance if the clerk doesn't have ballots available at the time the person registers.
And was there any controversy about this?
No. I don't remember any. This is, as Amarin said, she distinguished, if you look at 3A above, 3A is voters transferring among towns in Vermont. Mm-hmm. And we talked a lot about that, and that got left the way it is, which is that if somebody transfers in Vermont after the time the ballots have been mailed, the file's been pulled, mm-hmm. the clerk checks out whether a ballot's been returned for that person and asks them about the status of the previous ballot. 3B, this section, just refers to people registering for the first time in Vermont. And if it's after the time that file is pulled, they won't have been mailed a ballot. And I think some of the advocates just noted this, that it seemed like the whole intent of the bill would be that a first time registrant in that situation would get an automatic ballot mailed to them. And then the extra language accounts for, because since it references the time when we pull the mailing file, the clerks that may be so early that the clerks don't actually have the ballots. And that's why the language was added that if they don't have the ballots, they mail it as soon as they get them, which will be 45 days before the election.
Yeah.
But Madam Chair?
Yep.
Just a question on that.
Yep.
So Will, if they don't have the ballots, maybe it's before the ballots have even been printed. So wouldn't you just automatically let them be included in the statewide mail out? I mean, wouldn't they just, if it's so early that the clerks doesn't have ballots yet, maybe they'll just get mailed the ballot by your office?
That's a good question, Senator Clarkson. We talked about that ability for my office to potentially update that mailing file over time between sort of the first iteration of we send it and when the ballots start rolling out the door.
Yeah.
And I honestly, I couldn't commit to being able to do that, not knowing enough about how it's going to work with that vendor, whether it's a one-time file transmission or if it can be updated over the course of time. If we figure out that that's a possibility and easy to do, then we can work with this provision and with the clerks to say, these voters have been added to the mailing file list. I could potentially update them on a daily basis and say your new registrants have been added to the mailing file list. They don't need to know it.
So they wouldn't be duplicating any effort.
Yeah. Just didn't know enough about the detail of that process with whoever the vendor is going to be to commit to being able to supplement it like that. I hope so.
Okay. Any other concerns about that one? Okay. Next change.
All right, the next change is on page 16. And right now we're in the section about return of ballots. And this adds a new subsection F, which says no individual may return more than 25 ballots to the town clerk or to a secure ballot drop box unless the individual is a justice of the peace performing his or her official duties pursuant to section 2538 of this title. And that would also, that renumbered the previous subsection F into the G that you see before you. And also specifies that the clerk or other local election official accepting the return of ballots shall not be required to enforce the provisions of subsection. This used to say subsection just E. Now it says subsections E and F of this section, but shall report any suspected violation to the Secretary of State's office, who shall refer them to the Attorney General's office for investigation. And then on line 15, this previously said candidates violating. This now says individuals violating this section may be subject to penalties. There was significant committee discussion on this provision.
This is very interesting and a little bit bizarre, I think, that Grandma Jones delivers for the people in her neighborhood, and she picks up 6 of them and takes them to the town hall on Wednesday. And then on Thursday, she runs into 7 neighbors and picks them up and drops them off. Is the town clerk going to keep a running number of everybody that brings in a ballot so that they know when she runs into her friends at the grocery store who say, or if you're running right by the town clerk's office right now, can you just drop these off? And it happens to be ballot number 26. Is the town clerk going to keep a record, a running, like a bar tab?
Yeah, particularly with a drop box, which is how would you even know? It says, or to a secure ballot.
Right.
I mean, you're going to have no idea whose drop box ballots there.
I don't, so does somebody want to explain this?
I think all of what you said is true. And that's why it was important to me to have the provision in there that the clerk wasn't responsible for enforcement, so that they didn't have to be keeping this running bar tab, as you said, and monitoring the Dropbox. I think the idea is that having that on the books at least sends a message to people who know that that's the outside limit of ballots that you should be returning for somebody else. I mean, it was the same concern about ballot harvesting that we've heard that led to this provision.
So if I'm friendly neighbor here, I have to keep track for myself of how many ballots I'm picking up, or I can be charged because somebody else is watching me.
Yep.
Bring those ballots back, and I bring 12 of them to the town clerk, and then I put another 10 in the Dropbox, and then I want to do 4 more, and I'm in violation, right?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay.
I think this is searching for anyway. I think we should discuss this further at some point.
Anyway, okay, do you want to go on?
Sure.
Sorry.
So the next change is all the way down on page 20. And right now we are in the section that talks about if a ballot is deemed defective. This is subdivision B, beginning on line 7, and the changes are in Romanet 3, beginning on line 13. So this actually relates to changes that are made further down. I will just read this for now. Not later than the next. This is, this is the clerk. If a ballot is deemed defective, the clerk shall, not later than the next business day, transmit a notice with information required by the Secretary of State's office. This previously said mail a postcard rather than transmit a notice to the voter, informing the voter that the voter's ballot was deemed defective and rejected, the reason it was deemed defective, and the voter's opportunity to correct the error. And then this next section is new. If the ballot was deemed defective because the voter failed to sign the return certificate, to place the voted ballot in the certificate envelope, or did not return their unvoted primary ballots in the unvoted ballot envelope, the clerk shall include a returnable affidavit designed and provided by the Secretary of State's office with the notice, so the voter may cure the deficiency in accordance with subdivision 2547 D1C of this chapter.
So that means that if the ballot was defective, the town clerk now, first of all, they have to notify somebody by whatever means possible, right? It's no longer just a postcard. They have to decide how they're going to notify the person. And then then they have to send them an affidavit. First, they have to notify them. And then do they include the affidavit with their notification?
Yes, it must be
if
included.
Their notification, if their notification was by phone or email, then they also have to send them the affidavit.
This says that the affidavit shall include a returnable affidavit with the notice. So I read this as it would need to be in a form where you can include the affidavit with the notice. It would not be something that you could accomplish by phone and still comply with this section.
So if they notify them by phone, then they still have to send, then do they have to send out an affidavit or not?
If the defect is one of those 3 that are listed, then they need to send a notice with an affidavit. I suppose that does not prevent them from also providing notice by means of telephone or some other way where they could not include the affidavit. But if the defect is one of those 3 types of deficiency, then they would need to send the affidavit with the notice. That is how this is drafted.
Is this I believe is the section that had a lot of town clerks worked up, because it puts When we did a simple, I might be wrong here, but we did a simple postcard, and that's how they notified them. It was very clear. They sent out a postcard, end of story. Now the town clerks have the responsibility for figuring out how they're going to notify the person. And people will get all worked up because they notified them in the wrong way. It didn't tell them how to notify. So, well, you called my phone and I never answer my phone. You should have sent me an email. And then we have to send them an affidavit if we send them a written notice. But if we call them on the phone and tell them that their ballot was defective, if that's the means that we choose, then we don't have to send them an affidavit. I think it puts a lot of responsibility on the clerks. Senator Clarkson?
Actually, Senator Calmer was first, so I will cede my time first to Brian.
Okay.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Senator Clarkson. So I'm not clear, and I agree with everything the chair has already said. I'm not clear whether transmit a notice means that you actually have to have made contact with the voter, or if I just call and no one's home, oh, well, I transmitted a notice. There's nothing in the bill that says they actually have to make contact with the voter. So is the town clerk responsible for finding every way to contact the voter until that voter is contacted? Or I'm unclear as to, the degree of work that the town clerk's going to have to do here.
Yeah.
Is that the answer to the question?
Yeah. Yeah.
May I tag on to that? I mean, I think this unnecessarily complicates a situation that we made very simple. I mean, this is just ridiculous. This is like jumping through 88 hoops. If there's a problem, let the person know there's a problem. Let them come in and fix it. It's really, this is way over the top, in my humble opinion.
Will, did you?
I think I can help a little bit. Although they're legitimate concerns, and I did try and convey sort of everything that we had talked about on the Senate side when we were talking about this particular issue. And this is the biggest change from what you guys did. But to Senator Collimore's questions, I don't see it as putting any further responsibility on the clerks. And hear me out. You still have, for the first 25 days, they still have the option that you guys had as the only option, but it's still an option for them. They don't have to do anything else besides have a stack of postcards from my office on their desk that they send to anybody they deem defective. And if you think about it, they are going to have a mailing address for everybody that they're doing this for, because they just mailed them a ballot that was then successfully returned from that person despite the errors. So just as a baseline, a clerk, and this would be my guidance and my training, hey clerks, if you want to make it easy, you can just have the stack of postcards on your desk and do postcard notification to anybody. If you want, you can instead notify them by email or by phone during that 25-day period. Then we haven't really gotten there yet, or I can't remember if Ameren just went through it, but then during the 5 days, there's the next provision during the 5 days preceding the election that they really shouldn't mail. It says they're not required to mail anymore. It actually still allows them to do that as their notice means during that time, which I think is important. But then it says they have to go to other contact information that they have on file in order to contact the voter. And that was the provision that drew some ire and concern over on the House side from clerks, seeing that, okay, so during the last 5 days, am I going to have to be scrambling to find any contact information I have on file anywhere in the office for these people? And so we made an amendment that was part of Rep. McCarthy's amendment today that specifically said during that 5-day period, they only have to use any contact information that they have in the voter checklist. So they don't have to go scouring their office for any other contact information. But so again, the posture is I think the thought on the House side was just that you give them those additional options for notice during the 25 days. They still can just use the postcard and do mailing. And I understand the concerns with the other forms of notice. We talked about it, right? But my best answer to that is the clerk isn't responsible for ensuring anything other than the transmission. And the point was made over on the House side, I think you guys heard it too, that similarly, you don't know whether somebody received the postcard or not. It might get thrown away with the other postcards in their mail or not make it through the USPS in time. So in all of those modes of transmission, the clerk is only responsible for the first push out the door, hitting send on the email, leaving the voicemail, or putting the postcard in the mail. And
So-
Senator White, honestly, your question about the phone paired with the notice did not come up. That's a good one. As a practical matter, if you guys are okay with this, I can tell you what it would be is that the clerks would call them, and the affidavit is going to be available on our website and probably on the clerk's website, where the person could then go and get it and send it back. Or potentially the clerk would have to follow up, you're right, with mailing a physical affidavit. I would think that that point that you made would just be discouraging them in the first place from doing it by phone. And just as you said, what we would intend is, I wanted to get to this too, is to incorporate the affidavit language on the postcard. And so it's just going to be something where, yes, that was my ballot that you received, even though I failed to sign it, or even though I didn't put it in the envelope, or even though I didn't return the 2 primary ballots. That will also be included in, I've talked to my programmers already, and we will be able to set it up where as soon as the clerk marks the ballot defective in the system for that voter, you're in on that voter and you're saying return defective, boom, you'll get a little pop-up that says send email notice. One click, they can hit it. And if there's an email on file, you'll send an email notice with that same affidavit ability to respond. And last thing, we thought I should be able to put that affidavit, a means to submit it on the My Voter page also, so that you log into the My Voter page in the same way you can do an address update through that page. You can respond to a challenge letter through that page. You could send a note to the clerk that says, that's my ballot, I'd like to cure it.
So they're not actually including a returnable affidavit. What they're including is a link to an affidavit that they can return.
And no, in the case of the postcard and the email, it'll be a returnable affidavit right there. You're going to be able to return a portion of the postcard.
Okay.
Saying that's my ballot. With the email, I envision you'll be able to check it off electronically and send it back.
Okay. Okay.
But you're right, you can't transmit that affidavit by phone, and that did not come up.
So the postcard will have like a little tear off or something.
Yes.
Okay.
And that it's I want you to understand the intent of it too, because I actually really like that affidavit provision. It's not going to be helpful in a lot of cases to have to mail a whole new set of ballots back out to somebody who's out of state or across the state. And it would be much easier to be able to have them just affirm that that first set is their ballot. It's cost effective, it saves time. It really makes sense to have this option.
Okay, I get it.
Yep.
Other questions?
I was just curious when this amendment came up. Was this a committee amendment or was it on the floor?
No, it was one of the first early committee amendments we talked about.
Okay.
And Mike McCarthy took care of the second, but that was a committee amendment offered by him?
Yes.
Yeah.
And you'll see the next major substantive amendment is just the flip side of it in the voter section where it's talking about defective ballots. Amarin's about to get there, but that's where it proactively gives the voter this right to respond by affidavit.
Okay. Okay.
So following this section in subsection B on page 21, beginning at line 3, this is the section that was amended on the floor this morning. Do you want me to switch over to that language or come back to it after we've gotten through the remainder?
No, that would be perfect if we switched, I think, so we can follow in line. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm now looking at the, oops, that's not it. The amendment by Representative McCarthy, specifically the second instance of amendment, which would, it strikes this subsection B out entirely, but really the only portion that's changed is the sentence beginning with, in these cases, the clerk shall make a reasonable effort to provide notice to the voter as soon as possible, using any contact information for the voter and then is inserted other than the mailing address that is contained in the voter checklist. So that was the change in this language, so that it's clear that rather than just using any contact information for the voter, it has to be any contact information the voter other than the mailing address that is contained in the voter checklist. And I don't know, Will, if you want to add any context on that more than you already have.
Just what I said before. Yeah, I worked with Rep. Paella pretty closely to come up with that language, who is the town clerk in Londonderry.
Yep. Okay, great. Thanks.
Okay, so that is subsection B. Now I'm moving on to the next change, which is all the way down on page 30. And this is the section on how a voter may cure the defect. So there were a couple changes. There's a change in subdivision B. So the language as it read before was requesting a new ballot to be mailed to them by the clerk along with materials for submission of the new ballot, provided the new ballot is received. And this previously said by the town clerk or did we say presiding officer? I think it said by the town clerk or prior to the closing of polls. And so the change was to remove the town clerk part and say received by the presiding officer or other sworn election official prior to the closing of the polls, understanding that the ballot, to clear up any confusion that someone might think they can bring their ballot to the town clerk's office at 6:58 on election day and think that it will make it to the presiding officer or other sworn election official by the closing of polls. So subdivision C is new, and this is to add in the concept of curing a defective ballot by affidavit, which we just saw the clerk's instructions on what the clerk's obligations are. Now this is on what the voter needs to do. So subdivision C, for a voter who failed to sign the certificate envelope, failed to place the voted ballot in the certificate envelope, or did not return their unvoted primary ballots in the unvoted ballot envelope, returning the signed affidavit included in the notice under subdivision 2546A2B Romanet 3 of this subchapter, either by mail, in person, or electronically, provided the affidavit is received by the presiding officer or other sworn election official prior to the closing of the polls.
So does that mean that the presiding officer has to have constant email availability? On election day, I'm talking about.
It's a good question, Senator Collmore. They would not, because in a lot of cases, they don't have internet access at their polling places.
Well, then how can they be responsible for receiving it electronically? Boy.
Yeah, it does sound like they would have to have, because if I were a voter and I sent it, it says I can send it prior to the close. I don't know if they have internet capability at the polling place or not. That's not my problem. That's theirs.
No. That issue was not raised, Senator Collmore. I think thinking about it right now off the top of my head, I would have them, that would be an instance where they would have to adjust their official results after election night. So they get back to the office the next morning and see that they'd received an email about one of their defective ballots. They could still go pull that defective ballot from the envelope.
Wow.
I don't think that we will be seeing a large volume of ballots being cured by email on election day, but it's fair to think about. either by mail, in person, electronically.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that's something for us to discuss further.
I think you could address it by if you had a provision that electronic return of the affidavit had to be there by the day before the election.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think we should look at. I mean, we're just hearing this for the first time, so I'm hoping we're marking things that we want to address. This would be wonderful.
Yep. Okay.
All right, so moving down to page 35. You'll see section 21 has been deleted. This was the section that created the Assistant Director of Elections position at the Secretary of State's office and provided funding. This is now in the budget, so it has been removed from this bill. Any questions on that?
No.
Okay. And the next change was in section 21A following that. The title of this section used to be Voting Access Report. It now is Voting Access and Verification Report. And in this section, there is now a new subdivision 3 that was added onto this report requirement. This is a report required of the Secretary of State's office on or before January 30th, 2023 to the government operations committees with recommendations and with findings and any recommendations for legislative action on now subdivision 3, implementing a voter verification system in Vermont that will not disenfranchise voters and that will verify that ballots have been voted by registered voters, including a report back on the time, training, and cost involved in implementing the system or systems.
I have no idea what that phrase means.
What
does implementing a voter verification system that will not disenfranchise voters mean?
It seems like voter suppression language.
No, I actually think it means that is there some kind of a system out there where you could require voter verification that doesn't disenfranchise people? I mean,
it's like trying to have your cake and eat it too.
Right. I don't
verified, but we don't want it to be
disenfranchising people.
Yeah. I would, if I were writing that, I would have written whether or not we should have a system. But I'm not going to argue about that because the Secretary of State will do what they're going to do in a report.
Well, I think we should mark it for further discussion. I don't think it needs to leave.
Okay. If we're going to make other changes, then we might want to say whether or not we should implement.
We've identified at least 3 things for further discussion.
Yep.
Senator, if I may, Senator White, really quickly to Senator Collimore's question, I do think it's mainly referring to, and you're right, it may not be as artfully worded as it might have been, but it's referring to the return of absentee ballots. So voter verification is being able to verify that it was the voter themselves who returned the ballot. It's the signature verification issue. And whether, if that's not appropriate for Vermont, could we find out something different that would be?
Well, you said that much more artfully than that sentence did.
And that is in no way a comment on Amarin's drafting, because
I didn't mean it that way.
Out of her control, yeah.
I have a feeling it was suggested by somebody else.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I've had no problems with Amarin's ability to parse the English language.
So, committee, how do you want to do this? Did they do 3rd reading today?
No.
No, they just did finish 2nd reading, it sounds like.
So they're going to do 3rd tomorrow.
We'll get it Friday.
We'll get it Friday. Okay, between now and Friday, we can have this discussion.
Right.
On these 3 at least 3 issues. One, I don't remember what it was page 16F.
Right. I wrote it down.
And
16,
one was the electronically.
that's the number of ballots that can be returned by one
Oh,
person.
yeah. Oh, yeah. And then the other one was the report.
And the defective ballots. And the curing issue, if we want to look at that. I mean, all those endless provisions.
Well, if the town clerks are happy with that now, I am.
Are they? Are they?
That's my understanding. They are. Yeah. And
I
it
know
just,
that Kelly was one of the people.
Right. I heard Will say that.
just to focus so that you don't have to look at all of those curing provisions. Really what you were talking about was electronic return of the affidavit on election day.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that Senator Clarkson was referring to the part that gave town clerks many options for, instead of just giving them the,
Got it.
but if the town clerks are okay with having those options, I'm okay with it.
The affidavit is an additional effort, which is, I mean, I know Will says he supports it, but that's an additional effort too.
Well, not if it's on the, if
Yeah,
it's
keep in
printed
mind,
on
we're
the postcard.
incorporating it into the notice. And what it's really doing is preventing the additional effort of them having to send another package of ballots out to all of these folks
Right.
in order for
So you
them
have-
to cure.
You have a postcard that is 2 parts, and one of them says it's defective, and you can return this little affidavit on the bottom, just tear it off and send it back in and you say, yes, I swear that that was my ballot, I returned it, and here's my intent. And the same with the email. It's part of the notice itself. It isn't an extra step. And it does remove the extra step then of having to send out the new ballots.
True, but if you had a postcard that just said, your ballot is defective, come in and cure it.
He already said that there would be a tear off part to it that you would send back. Because if you just send a postcard and says your ballot is defective, you can change it, and then the person calls and says, well, will you send me a new ballot?
Well, no, that you can ask them just to come in and fix it.
There's a lot of these people are out of state or too far away to come in and fix it. And so your previous version said they could do that, come to the clerk's office and fix it, or be mailed a new set of ballots. And this substitutes for that.
So this simplifies it in some ways.
And Senator Clarkson, I think that's right, though, because it's important to remember the whole context. I think a lot of these people will be local and will just swing by the office and fix it. And those are the kind of people you could call. People you know are right down the street. Hey, Mary, your ballot's defective. You should swing by and fix it. And that flexibility, then I have to send Mary a postcard when I can do that. But
Okay.
Shall I continue?
Oh, I thought that was, I thought we were on
We
page
were hoping
30.
we were done.
There's a little more, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, okay.
Oh, we were only at page 36.
Yes.
There are only 37 pages.
Yeah, that's why I think we jumped to the conclusion we were.
So there is a new section now, section 22 on page 36 regarding the maintenance of the voter checklist. So the new provision you'll see is on page 37. This adds a subdivision 6 that says that the Secretary of State shall make reasonable efforts on an ongoing basis to compare the information on the checklist with data or information contained in any state agency's database, a database administered by the federal government, or any database of another state or consortium of states, where possible, in an effort to maintain the accuracy and currency of the checklist.
Actually,
That sounds very Big Brother-ish to me. It does. It says, what if I use one email with the tax department and I use another email for my checklist, or I use my phone, my cell phone for one and my landline for another. I mean, really? Do we? I don't know. Somebody
put
help
it
me out
on
here. I think this sounds very much like we're going to make sure that your information is the same everywhere you give it. Damn it.
right, and it may not be. Anyway, let's add it to our list for review.
Will, do you want to comment on that?
Real quickly, I hadn't scrolled down to the language, but that is not how I read it, Senator White. That's telling us to make an effort at data comparison of the whole list to other databases. For instance, the Department of Health records that we already do, for purposes of trying to figure out whether somebody's moved, not because the data has to match perfectly between those two systems at all times. And the intent of this, at least as I understand it, was to essentially codify what my office already does and is committed to do, like being members of ERIC and using the available databases we have, so that we can ensure that future administrations continue to do that. And I think it was meant to send a message that we're serious about checklist maintenance, because we'd heard so many concerns about the current status of the voter checklist and what do you do to keep it up. So I think it was trying to put on the books that we have to, on an ongoing basis, make these efforts.
I still don't understand what the effort what it means. Senator Colomar?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And I think I'm understanding what Will's referencing. If somebody moves to another state, but they're still on our checklist, this is a way to at least say, wait a minute, they're registered in 2 different states. Let's compare them and see where this person really should be voting, kind of thing.
Or they got a driver's license in that state.
That's what I took it to mean. I didn't feel a big brother-ish aspect to it. I just felt it was prudent to use all the resources the Secretary of State's office has to make sure that what we have for our voter checklist is as accurate as we could get it.
Yeah, I agree. The phrase that bothered me was in any state agency's database. So what does that mean when you compare your checklist to the health database or to the driver's license database or the tax department or what the unemployment? I don't know. What does it mean to compare your list to their lists?
Just that. To compare the two
why?
lists. See where the more current record is. Or in the health department's case, it's just to take the people who have died and remove them from our list.
That I can see if you're using it for that purpose, but the health department has other databases, like who's been vaccinated and who hasn't, and who, it just seems, I don't know why you would compare, because they don't have, anyway. I'm okay with it, I guess, if everybody else is. It just makes me a little nervous.
Well,
I was okay with how it's worded. It talks about us making a reasonable effort and leaves pretty broadly the sources of information we could use for it.
Can you give an example of, do you try to do that now? Are you blocked in some way from doing that now? Where would you go most frequently?
No is the real answer. We're not inhibited from doing that in almost any way right now. And that's why I described it as sort of trying to codify our current practice and just make sure that it continues into the future. And the best example is our membership in this ERIC group that I've referred you guys to a few times now. That is really a nationwide effort to do exactly what that paragraph describes.
That I can see, because that is Senator Colomar's example there. Somebody moves and they're, that I can see entirely. I don't get at all. Just give me an example of a state agency other than people dying that you would look at you would compare the databases and for what purpose? And what would you do with it?
Can I get back to you?
Sure,
I think
And I
I
hate
could
to-
think of one.
Huh?
If somebody moves from Brattleboro to Burlington, you're going to have two separate addresses in different databases. The Secretary of State probably would want to have the most recent address on file so that they know where they're voting.
But some people, you know, if they're a student, for example, might be making the decision, I still want to vote in Brattleboro, even if I'm in Burlington right now. So it just seems like you're kind of choosing to make a decision for somebody that
There's
they can
nothing
still
in that
decide.
provision about changing any voter record or doing anything to any voter record.
But it still says you might just streamline the information, which I think still could make a decision on someone else's behalf that they didn't want made.
So maybe what we'll do is ask Will to come back with a couple examples of, other than address changes for voting purposes and people dying. Why would you compare my name to a database for people who have fishing licenses?
Okay.
Or, yeah. Okay. Thank you. Amarin, did we jump ahead? Are you done now?
Not quite done.
Effective date.
So one thing I had suggested that the bill title be amended at the bottom of an act relating to mailing out ballots, correcting defective ballots, and miscellaneous changes to state election laws. This is long, but it describes what this is doing for the most part. So that's something to think about. And then also, Madam Chair, I could very quickly walk through the House Appropriations Amendment that was approved this morning on the floor.
Okay. Good.
And that is also posted on the website for today. This would add a new section, section 22A, entitled Appropriations Fiscal Year 2022 Funding Source. So this would appropriate $800,000 to the Secretary of State's office for one-time elections-related expenses in fiscal year 2022. And it lays out how the appropriation will be funded, which is first, the amount of $400,000 in general funds is appropriated to the Secretary of State's office. Two, the remaining $400,000 appropriation shall be funded by the Secretary of State Service Fund or by Help America Vote Act, also known as HAVA funds, to the extent those funds are available to absorb the costs or from other federal funds made available to the Secretary of State's office. And then in subdivision 3, to the extent the costs cannot be funded or absorbed as outlined in subdivisions 1 and 2, the Secretary of State's office shall include any remaining costs in its fiscal year 2022 budget adjustment proposal. And now I'm done.
And did they have that in their budget? I don't remember. Did the House have it? The House have it in their budget also?
Yes, as far as I know.
That's what okay, great.
The money stuff is not my expertise. Sorry.
Nor mine, as my committee knows. All right, committee, I'm going to suggest that I'm going to suggest that we take, oh my goodness, it's 3:40.
Yeah, and we have a 4 o'clock.
Oh, Larry.
Poor Larry. I have to say, we need to probably.
We'll have cake for you the next time you come, Larry.
Ooh, in Zoom land, I'm not sure that's a fair promise.
Well, we can each be eating a piece of cake and pretend like we're giving him cake.
Oh, that won't work. That's the let them eat cake. That would be a very bad reflection.
I apologize. Both the topics that we had this morning or this afternoon took longer than I thought. That's my bad planning. And so we can just briefly talk about, let's jump here to ethics right now and say that tomorrow we'll come back and and look at these issues from the elections bill. Is that fair?
Yep.
So give us some time to think about it and to figure out where we want to go. And in the meantime, I will try to talk to the chair of House GovOps to figure out if we made changes, what that would mean. And then do a serious, that shouldn't take us more than, what? Half an hour. Do you think? And then do a serious look at the code of ethics. And in the meantime, maybe we can just have a little conversation with Larry for a while and then take a 5 or 10 minute break before we go to the chairs meeting.
Sounds good.
I do apologize. This week has last week and this week have challenged I need that agenda fairy godmother.
Well, you still have the fairy godmother. We just don't have the same time to do the.
Yeah.
Dynamic.
All right. Thank you, Will, Amron. That was, thank you. And we will look at those 3 or possibly 4 areas.
Chair White,
Amron?
Chair White, what you're missing is your wand.
That's true. I'm missing both my wand and my gavel. And poor Amron doesn't even know about the wand.
Well,
I
I have a wand. It's one of those that has the little sprinkly colored sprinkles inside of it, you know, and you tip it up and down and it goes like this and they float down and then they float down. And when we come to issues that simply can't be resolved, I wave my wand and they resolve. But it's in my committee room. And
actually, Amarin can, if she's ever in the State House, she could go access it.
she could go get the wand. Yes, Amarin.
I really do apologize. I realized I did not cover the other portion of Representative McCarthy's floor amendment this morning. I got sidetracked. So if you look at his amendment, it's the first instance of amendment. Luckily, this is not a complicated change, but it is a change. This has to do with ballots being, when ballots may be returned using those secure drop boxes. Presently, or previously in your version and in the first House Government Operations recommended version, it still had the language that ballots may be deposited in the drop boxes until the close of business on the day before election. This would allow in subdivision 2 a Board of Civil Authority to vote to allow ballots to be deposited in the drop boxes on the day of election up until the closing of the polls on election day. So that was a flexibility that was requested, and so that went into a floor amendment for this. So you can look at the language a little more closely in the amendment and compare that to what's currently in the bill. And I don't know if you want to add that to your discussion topics, but I just wanted to make sure that I highlighted that that was approved this morning.
I don't know that I have any problems with that. If the BCA does it, then they're going to have to figure out how to get the ballots. Okay.
I don't have any problem with that as long as it's situated at the polling place.
Or if the BCA decides that they're going to have somebody sitting beside the drop box, and at 7 o'clock, they're going to rush them to the polling place. They have been received, but that's their decision.
Yeah, they can.
Yeah.
They can do what they want.
Okay. Thank you, Will.
Thanks, committee.
Thank you, Amarin.
See you soon.
You're welcome.
All right, Larry, I do sincerely apologize once again for doing this to you.
Okay.
So
So what's the plan?
The best laid plans.
I know that part.
You know that part. Okay. The plan would be at 1 o'clock tomorrow. We will, from 1 to 1:30, we will look at these changes to the election law. And at
Okay.
1:30 or 1:45, give us a few minutes because we might go over, we will do a review of the code of ethics. We will not we will not pass this out this year. We know that.
Yeah.
But we can make another discussion, another walkthrough of it, and start having the discussions, which I think will put us in better position in January when we come back to have given our colleagues and people out there some notion of where we're going with some of the more controversial issues.
Okay.
And I'm sorry you're missing Julie.
Me too. Right. And her successor has not yet been appointed. So, okay, so we'll start tomorrow. So we're not going to do anything today. We'll start tomorrow at about what, 1:45, maybe?
Yeah, let's
Okay.
say Senator
And then
Collmer.
will we have the rest of the afternoon?
That's what I was going to suggest, Madam Chair. Since we have pushed Larry through the revolving door at least twice before, I'd suggest that we start with Larry tomorrow, and that if the Secretary of State has to wait, so be it.
I would support that.
The only reason, we won't get the elections bill
We don't get it
by Thursday anyway, right?
Right.
Okay.
Just as a matter of courtesy, I think we can take Larry and Thomas right off the bat. If they go 2 hours, they go 2 hours.
Okay. So let's plan on 1 o'clock till 3 o'clock.
Okay.
Good suggestion, Senator Collmore. Because I think it's more like 4 times.
Thank you. Well, I didn't want to beat us up too badly either.
Does that work for everybody?
Yeah.
Okay. So 1 to 3, you're on.
Okay. And then just to be clear, I just want to make sure that I understand what you're looking for. We sent you, after our last appearance, an explanation of some of the questions that come up. We can briefly go over those if it's necessary. If it's not necessary, I'm fine to go through it. And basically, I've got a couple of major points, but that I can just explain how each provision in the code works and give you examples of situations where they might arise, those provisions might arise. But our biggest point that we'd like to make is that the big distinction between having a code that tells us what standards we are to hold ourselves to, as opposed to enforcement, which is down the road. We are absolutely not talking about enforcement. It's important for everybody to understand what standards of conduct we should aspire to, and then have a period of time for education and awareness. And that'll give us an opportunity to see where the need for enforcement may or may not be, and then to come back with proposals for how this may be enforced. I mean, definitely at some point it will be, but the amount of enforcement, what that would look like, will be apparent after a period of acclimation. So those are basically the big points. And our goal will be to get a code and then educate.
Yeah, for me, that makes perfect sense, that's the approach we should take.
Yeah. Good.
So
then,
all right.
1,300 hours tomorrow?
Is that 1 o'clock?
Yeah.
1,300 hours it is, Novans. We're
Thank
looking
you.
forward.
Okay, and again, I'm sorry.
Well, we'll see you tomorrow. That'll
But
be
we'll see you
great.
tomorrow at 1:00 for 2 hours.
PM Eastern Daylight Time,
Yes, right here in this room.
right here in River City.
With
Great.
with cake.
Okay.
Sorry.
It's
Well,
okay.
if we were in the State House, I really would bring you cake.
Well, we can have it delivered. Maybe we
I don't
can-
know if appropriately I could even receive it. That's another matter, but we'll talk about that.
Oh, you are the ethics guy.
Of all people, of all
I know, but
people.
it could be a homemade cake and it would have cost us nothing.
Right. If it's less than $20 and it's not a recurring gift, it would be fine.
Well, certain types of cakes are recurring gifts. Anyway.
Okay. So
All right.
thank you all. And I guess we'll see you tomorrow. Unless you
Yep.
have any questions today in our remaining 9 minutes.
No, I think some of us have to do a couple little trips here before we sign
think we
into our
just
4
stand
o'clock
up.
meeting.
Housekeeping items.